All right, welcome to our presentation. This is Accelerating Climate Change Communication. We're going to discuss an overview of how new technologies can impact climate change communication and the things they can and both cannot do, or some of the challenges with that. My name is Dr. Jaigris Hodson, and I'm here with Dr. Ann Dale. We are both from Royal Roads University. Say hello, Ann.
Hello, everybody. Delighted to be here, and particularly in such a sustainable conference format.
Absolutely. We're very excited to keep our carbon footprint low while sharing this information with you. So, to start, we've got an outline. We're going to discuss big topics like climate change. Why are they so challenging? And then we're going to get into specifics of the climate communication challenge, presenting an ecological model of communication on this issue. And we're going to talk how information overload and filters play a role in digital communication. And then we're going to bring about some ideas about how digital communication can be a solution to some of these big, messy problems.
We'll be talking about the challenges of communicating climate change, as Jaigris just mentioned, and the need to involve diverse nested audiences. Many talk about in this field about engaging all stakeholders, but I would argue there's no one without a stake in the climate, including the others, the biodiversity with whom we share the planet. So that means that we can't involve all the stakeholders, but we can deliberately design to have as many voices at the table as possible, which of course is the power of the internet.
Absolutely.
And of course, the yes, and particularly the ecological model of communication. So, what is the nature of climate change adaptation and mitigation and potential solutions? Climate change is a messy, wicked problem. It involves complex, dynamic living systems in which cause and effect are difficult to determine. It has emergent properties that are impossible to predict, information is incomplete, knowledge uncertain, and it is time, place, and scale dependent. Its scale worldwide demands action by multiple levels of government: local, regional, national, and international. And it has huge equity issues, including intergenerational social justice and spatial justice. For example, what's currently happening with the small island states who are on the very, very front line of climate change impacts. The threat is existential. Therefore, modern communication channels are critical for communicating the research, the solutions, and co creating those solutions with diverse audiences. The challenges are beyond any one sector, any one discipline, or any one level of government to solve. It is a collective commons challenge, and it demands unprecedented levels of cooperation and collaboration, as well as the need to involve diverse audiences, as previously mentioned, of all ages.
But in order to address this issue, we have to think about how communication on large topics is challenged in this new media environment and in this digital environment that we inhabit. Studies have shown that there's just so much information out there that people need to develop filtering strategies in order to understand that. We'll talk a little bit about this later. But basically, what happens is when people do filter, they tend to create an echo chamber of information that already confirms their existing points of view. So, what we learn here is that if people are against climate change or they're looking for a reason to not believe climate change, maybe their job depends on it, maybe their belief system or their community makes them feel sort of that they don't trust the science. Unfortunately, there's so much misinformation out there digitally, they can usually find exactly what they're looking for. There's a second challenge too with big topics like climate change. Climate change is an issue that I like to call a chronic issue. It doesn't go away, it's always present. Unlike some sort of acute disaster like a terrorist attack or an earthquake or another natural disaster, climate change is always sort of with us and always there under the surface. And the human tendency when dealing with these issues is to sort of think, oh, I'm helpless in the face of it, so I can't really do anything at all. There's no event or um, a acute problem that can inspire people to get together and take action now. So we've got sort of a double challenge here. First of all, there's a lot of misinformation out there, and there is a volume of misinformation that sometimes obscures the fact that so many scientists are in agreement about this issue. And then finally, there's the nature of the issue itself, makes it difficult for people to feel like their communication will really make a difference in their lives. So, in order to address this climate communication problems, including the messy, wicked challenges that Anne talked about, this existential and a chronic issue, and the fact that it stretches beyond any borders, any sectors, any disciplines, any government, we need to understand change both at the micro level, the level of the human being, at the meso level, the level of the organization, and the macro level, the level of society. This is our ecological model for climate communication. The communication needs to occur across these boundaries in order to have an impact on a problem such as this. And coming back to the idea of this information overload on the line, I have included an image here. Getting information off the internet is like taking a drink from a fire hydrant. And I think we can all relate to the sheer volume of information that is out there and the difficulties in finding what it is that you need. Organizations such as Google and Facebook, which are the primary ways we access information online, have dealt with information overload by providing us with algorithms. The algorithms deliver us more of what we want to see and less of what we're not interested in because they judge what we click on, those people that we interact with, and they feed us more of that. That unfortunately creates a problem known as a filter bubble. Now, if you click on the image here at another time, you will see that I have included a video about filter bubbles. We don't have time to go through the whole thing here. But basically, what a filter bubble means is that a person who doubts climate change will be surrounded by points of view that only influence and secure their existing knowledge base. So they won't be exposed to points of view that challenge them. They won't be encouraged to think differently because they're trapped in an algorithmic bubble online, which basically walls them off from dissenting points of view. And in this case, we could say walls them off from the truth of the matter.
So we've presented the big, grand challenge of something that you can't really see, feel, or as some people don't believe 95% of the world's scientists until it's too late. But we are firmly committed and believe we can harness the power and reach of social media to get our research out there and get it out there to diverse audiences, and therefore build on the incredible momentum of COP21. There were a few factors that were really interesting this time, and I think they apply as well to the networked formation we're talking about through the use of social media. First, there was incredible social cohesion of the world's leaders, ironically due to the tragedy of the Paris attacks. So they probably came together much more firmly than it would have had without that sort of tragic backdrop. But I cannot emphasize enough the French government leadership and including the president of France. There was also unprecedented civil society collaboration, sophistication, and again, social cohesion that we haven't seen before. And the small state leadership by the Maldives and coalition building prior to COP21. President of the Maldives called people together 6 months prior to COP21. So then he built that coalition of the small island states and involved other people in that. And then there was the private sector leadership and announcements by Google, by L'Oreal, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, it was amazing. So building on that, how then can we use social media to contribute to sustaining the incredible momentum that was built up in December?
Yeah, and I think that we can see a lot of these factors that we can understand in relation to some of the challenges that we highlighted and also the ecological model that we talked about earlier. So, for example, we are seeing that unfortunately the tragedy of the Paris attacks did create an acute moment from a chronic problem, right? As did COP21 itself, right? We can see this blending of levels, meso, and macro, in order to cross borders, both geographical borders, but also the borders of organizations. We see small states, we see private sector, and we're seeing the civil society leadership come together. And these factors are the ones that we want to try and come up with models to sustain using social media and other digital technologies. So, this is not an unprecedented point of view to take. In fact, many scholars have written on the online public sphere or the networked public sphere. So, since mass participation became a part of the popular internet, scholars have been noticing that people can stand up and have more of a voice than maybe they would have had before. So, participation on social media, on blogs, on the comment sections of newspapers, all these things matter. Yoshai Benkler, for example, talked about a networked public sphere. And other theorists, such as Daniel Drake, have noted the importance of this kind of activity in movements that have changed the world. So, we can think about Idle No More, we can think about Black Lives Matter, and things that are still continuing, even despite the filter bubbles that we talked about earlier. Clay Shirky, for example, talked about networked individualism. He used the example of lol cats, which we have a picture of here. These are these stupid memes with the cats on them. And he said, well, right now there's a cognitive surplus. People are moving away from passive activities like watching television into more active activities like updating their status on Facebook, connecting with people on Twitter, or making cute pictures of cats. He says, but there are instances where that kind of cognitive surplus, the fact that people are participating, can be harnessed in a time of need for participation for positive action. And he was saying the barrier is not getting people to participate in something that matters. He says the barrier is getting them to participate at all. And so once you've gotten that participation, even if it's a cat on a computer, you can then harness that participation for things that really matter. And Henry Jenkins, who studies fan cultures, has noticed this too. There is a community of people who will participate, who are participating based on something that they care about. And when what they care about moves from, say, lolcats or a fan culture to something like climate change, that is when real change happens. And I think we can see that with millennials who are demanding change already. Now, 24% of tweets were by one person. This person is very interested in creating change around climate change, but is not getting their message out. And on Twitter, we're seeing a filter bubble of general agreement around the topic. Everybody is agreed that climate change is a problem, which could be seen as a good thing, or again, could be seen as evidence that there's not a discussion around this topic that is influencing those people who aren't seeing it as an issue. On Instagram, we see again a high modularity. We see those groups. We see a medium reciprocity, which means they're having more ability to get their message out, but it's still not a high ability to get their message out. On Instagram, we're also seeing the presence of celebrity voices. For instance, you could see in the big green dot on our diagram, Leonardo DiCaprio is a big voice in climate change. And we're able to see geographically where people are posting from on Instagram because people geotag their posts on Instagram in a way that they don't on Twitter. And we're seeing most of our activity in the US and Europe. So again, this is suggesting a bit of a filter bubble exists. We're also seeing, interestingly on Instagram, a presence of dissent or misinformation. As you can see of the popular hashtags in the second diagram there, we're getting pro-life, we're getting libertarian, and we're also seeing some discourses that aren't reflected here, but that are anti-Hillary Clinton discourses and anti-climate change discourses. This isn't necessarily a bad thing. In fact, it could be an opportunity if the communities can move towards dialoguing with one another. Right now, the high modularity is a problem more than the presence of dissent. If the message could reach out beyond those filter bubbles, beyond those small isolated communities, then that message could reach those people who are currently dissenting, but also in their own modular community of their bubble. And so our big question here is how do we harness technology and digital communication to encourage that message to get out so that we're not seeing a series of bubbles anymore. Instead, we are seeing a larger conversation between those who need to have all the information and those who already possess it. The next thing is to know your audience. How can you reach people with a message when they feel exactly the opposite of the way you do? Well, we've learned from communication theory and how to persuade people that you can only nudge people a little bit in the direction you want to go over time. So, what is the message that will nudge them a little bit closer to taking action on this issue? And then in time, what is the next message to nudge them a little bit closer? How to make a difference in the noise, we also have to realize these things are time and place dependent. Just because they're online doesn't mean we get away from that. So, how can we have many, maybe localized events that also have hashtags associated with them? This begins to teach us the value of approaching our tools strategically. You got to have a plan. Just getting online isn't enough. You need to know your audience, you need to know who's out there, and you need to know how to reach them. And then finally, I think we've said this in a few different ways, but place-based and virtual complement one another and work together. Virtual is never a substitute for place-based action.
So in the year 2000, when I joined Royal Road University, one of the questions that really bugged me was, and my online work was, how in such an interconnected, well-wired world has it taken since COP21 to break through with consensus on climate science? IPCC has been showing scientific consensus since 1995, and today I think it's 98% of the world's scientists are in agreement. So I thought, okay, how can we harness the power of the internet for forces of light, for meaningful, sustained dialogue on issues such as sustainable community development and climate change? So I developed this platform called e-dialogues. And they're important because I think they can engage in a very sustainable way, broad communities to bring people together to talk about the meaning of their community. And as well, my research was showing that there was a lot of innovations happening on the ground in local communities that were not being reported on in mainstream community. I mean, there's the theory that the more you keep people disempowered, the more they'll just participate in consumption. So I was trying to sort of see if we could use the power of the light or the force to scale up and scale out some of those innovations that I was finding on the ground. And as well, I was interested in how you can increase the density and centrality of these innovation nodes and networks for social change. So e-dialogues are essentially real-time online text-based conversation, a platform we kept deliberately simple to be able to engage communities regardless of their size, particularly small communities. Then in September 2015, e-dialogues were morphed into something called Changing the Conversation platform, with 3 spaces for different kinds of engagement: join, share, and explore. Join is the conversational platform where expert panels bring together researchers with community practitioners, with policymakers, civil society leaders, and decision makers to engage in a 2-hour conversation, actively moderated by a researcher, and usually scripted with 3 general questions that guide the conversation. An e-audience, a live chat feature, lets people join in and listen to the panel discussion, have their own panel, and ask questions of the panelists. The panelists, those of us who are more tech savvy, go back and forth between the 2 spaces. Some examples of the issues we have addressed in over 70 conversations to date are sustainable community development, the management of used nuclear fuel in Canada, which attracted over 10,000 Canadians, spirituality in the cosmos that one of my students made me lead, green buildings, and more recently, the revitalization of the social sector here in Canada, the climate imperative series, and post-COP21, what is Canada doing? The share and explore spaces are still being developed. The former will be seeded with my research outcomes as they are happening on the ground, and people will be invited to share their knowledge, sort of like a Wikipedia. 2 pieces being shared in the month of May are a map of websites dedicated to public policy issues, democracy, and new models of engagement, and of course, critical climate change sites. We hope that once we go live, that others will then add their sites, and we will grow an organic map that will allow us to see and connect with one another more easily, and then explore how to increase our influence in new collaborations. The other will be a map of co-benefits of acting on climate change adaptation and mitigation. For example, if you design more compact, walkable communities, you decrease morbidity rates from obesity, heart disease, and diabetes. Hard to believe it's that simple, but it is all related. So, by illuminating more of these co benefits, we hope to accelerate local community innovations. Often we can't see these hidden benefits, and daylighting them is important information for decision makers at the local level. The explore space is about experiments, what is on the edge, not the leading edge, but the bleeding edge of collaboration. Stay tuned as we develop that space. What indicators of success do we have with these online dialogic, conversational spaces that we believe so much in? I'll mention only two. The action agenda for BC decision makers, climate change adaptation and mitigation, and the solutions agenda. These were developed in using virtual spaces in combination with using physical space of peer-to-peer learning exchanges. We developed incredible consensus on the BC Action Agenda of over 100 policy practitioners, researchers, civil society leaders from across the country, and I believe that it has continued to move the province in its climate change actions. The solutions agenda is similar to another agenda developed here in Canada, the LEAF Manifesto, and it brought together over 50 people from across the country in 2-year virtual conversations of bringing the innovators together and then bringing them all together at the end. And we had consensus among those 50 people on the way forward. They're tight policy documents deliberately designed to try to influence decision making in this country. So that's it. Jaigris?
Changing the conversation takes a chronic problem and makes conversation starters around these different issues, creating that acute issue that people can respond to. It gives people tools to go out into the world and connect different communities. And it's a place independent of Twitter, Instagram, Google, or Facebook that is not governed by those algorithms that keep us all in our bubble. I think that more communities that are grassroots, bottom up, like changing the conversation, have the tremendous potential to take these conversations in ways where they simply can't go with your traditional social media outlets. And so, Anne, do we invite people to join the conversation with us?
Oh yes, I'd be delighted to get your views and hear what others are doing. And just another last note: one of the things about changing the conversation, because they're virtual, of course, there's no greenhouse gas emissions, and one can sit in one's office. And if they're later in the afternoon, you can even have a glass of wine as you're having your conversation.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining us, and we welcome your comments and questions in the forums for this conference. So we'll see you online.